morning, everyone. Welcome to Boulders Brass Podcast. We are here with the lovely folks of Things Musicians Don't Talk About to talk about all things to do with their podcast and things to do with some well-being, which we'll carry on into our next panel as well, which we're very, very privileged to be hosting this morning. So I'm going to let you each introduce yourself and let us know a little bit about you, and then we've got some questions to work our way through. So it looks like, Hattie, you're being presented first.
So, Melissa, for having us this morning. We are absolutely forever inspired with what you do and the incredible structure you have to your podcast. Something I'm always going to aspire to. And also, we're just wishing you all the best for today and hope everybody goes and supports you as much as they can, because what you do is just phenomenal. And yeah, anyway, so I am Hattie Butterworth. I'm a cellist. I'm also a bit of a writer, do a bit of journalism here and there. I'm currently working for Shop Music London in their contemporary music department as an intern. And I've been doing that for the past few weeks, and I've got 6 months of that. But yeah, most of all, I'm a cellist and campaigner for musicians' mental health, well-being, and I started Things Musicians Don't Talk About in 2020, slightly accidentally, but it was kind of just started out of my own experience with mental illness and my ongoing kind of like quest to find balance and to understand the thought patterns that go on in musicians' life and through musicians' sort of activity that so often I feel like we just take for granted. Like, why am I feeling like my self-worth is completely non-existent? Oh, maybe it's because the way I've been treated in my lessons means that this is my default now. So I think a lot of what we're trying to do on the podcast at the moment is to sort of like just question our mentality towards elements of music education, elements of our musical careers. So yeah, Rebecca, why don't you introduce yourself?
How can I go after that? That was like a whole speech. That was amazing.
Yeah, I kind of took like a lot of the intro for you.
That
Sorry.
was great. No, I was just going to say thank you, Melissa. And if we tried to do a 12-hour podcast-a-thon, it would be a mess. Can you imagine? We're totally in awe of you.
We would just be like eating pizza, like
watching RuPaul.
Yeah.
Yes, I'm Rebecca. I am primarily a trumpet player and teacher, I guess. I joined the podcast because Hattie asked me to after she interviewed me, and it's been really fun and I feel really honoured. Yeah, I have similarly struggled with my own mental health, primarily like depression, and I had some eating disorders way back when. So yeah, I've just really enjoyed challenging and questioning everything music related with Hattie, and can't wait for more, basically.
Amazing. Well, you know, I'm a big fan of what you do. I'm also in camp mental health advocacy, which is a word I don't know why my brain was about to say avocado, so I'm glad that it came out the right way the first time. I think we're going to be questioning my sanity by the end of today anyway. But yeah, you're doing some really, really important stuff, and I'm a big fan of, you know, trying to open up the conversations in the way that you do. How is it you go about finding the guests that you want to talk to? Because you talk about such a wide range of, I'm going to use, you know, quote unquote taboo subjects or difficult to talk about subjects. How do you find people that you're going to talk about? Because unlike me, where I can just look people up and be like, hey, you play the tuba, you seem interesting, come and talk to me. It's got to be a lot harder to be like, you have an issue, come and talk to us. And I use the word issue as a sort of light-hearted thing within this group of people who address their issues in a similar way. I'm not making any fun.
So, how do we start this? So I suppose it's a mixture of everything. Quite often people get in touch and share their story, which we love. You know, we love if you want to email us and have a story to share. You know, doesn't necessarily mean it's going to end up on the podcast, but it just might do. You never know. You know, we love hearing from people. That's probably a big part of how we find people. Another thing is I have a bit of an obsession with late night internet searches. So Rebecca will honestly like say most evenings at about 10, I will send another guest that I found through some completely weird way. So I suppose the way I do that, I have kind of buzzwords that I search, and I look on like the fourth page of Google. So I mean, I'm always searching classical musicians talk about mental illness, classical musicians talking about trans issues, trans classical musicians, or trying to think of other examples like. And I mean, I'm also sometimes searching on blogs and forums for. Sometimes I try and find more controversial things to see if people have counteracted something controversial and have shared their story through that, and then we might contact them that way. So there's kind of a mixture of things. Sometimes they're, quite well-known people that you've heard on the grapevine. Sometimes I've listened to a podcast that they've already done with someone else, and I've thought, oh, I want to ask them more questions. I don't feel like they totally went right into that vulnerable thing. They just touched on it briefly, but, we really want to go deep. Example of that was Claire Hammond, who is a pianist, and I heard her talk on another podcast, but she talked a bit about her mental illness, but not fully in depth. And I think the depth that we managed to get in that interview was something that really impacted both of us, because she was so unapologetic about saying, this is my depression experience. It was horrific. It was dark. It was creepy as shit, and that's okay to say as a solo pianist. So anyway, Rebecca, I don't know if you want to add anything to that about how you look for people.
Just that, yeah, it can be really hard because you don't want to see someone that's like clearly got an issue and be like, hi, we can clearly see that you're mentally unwell.
Yeah.
Would you be willing to come and talk to us about that? It is really hard. Or presuming that if somebody is from a minority or has some sort of disability, that they see it as a problem that they've had to overcome. So it's a tricky one, and you have to word things really carefully. But yeah, most of the time I just wake up from like a stream of WhatsApp messages from Hattie being like, oh my God, I found this person, we have to interview them, I've already emailed them 5 times, and like this kind of thing. So yeah, she goes into the depth of the internet. It's very impressive.
My absolute favourite thing to do. I love doing it. And you're dead right though, like that is a thing that we do have to be careful of as well, is like tokenism, and not thinking, oh, there's this one trans musician, let's force them to like be the trans musician that we have on our podcast. And same with BAME musicians, do we just want this one person on because we haven't had a black person for ages? We try and not, as you say, like it is really hard to get that balance. And also finding an issue with, traditionally women tend to be more open, so we have like so many women, and then not so much on the sort of male or even non-binary side of things. So it's a balance we're trying to get right, but it's it's fun. Sure. I love looking for people.
I can understand how it's, you want to be respectful but still curious. I also should point out at this point, I did put this on my Instagram story this morning. There has been some construction work that started right outside my house this morning, literally the other side of the wall from where I'm sitting right now, and I couldn't record anywhere else, so I apologize for any weird background noise, folks that are tuning in. Hopefully it's not too noisy, but I'm just very aware. It's just sort of resumed. Moment, didn't they? Yeah, they've really kicked off. They've been set up there for 4 days, and this morning they must have sensed that there was something that needed quiet happening today to kick off. So anyway, that's my sort of just like blanket apology. There's not really anything I can do about it. Sorry. So, are there any topics that are yet to be featured or spoken about on the podcast that you feel are important? Because I understand what you're saying. You don't want to just ask somebody because they suffer with or are experiencing something that you haven't included. It's not about including them for that reason, but other things that you think should be discussed that you haven't managed to have that conversation about yet.
I think that there are quite a few, because everything is experience based, and for instance, I know that before I joined there was a huge series on financial hardship, And I would be interested in talking to more people since COVID about financial hardship, for sure. But also, I just really like that it's never like, oh, we've done this one topic, so we like don't have to. So I'd really like to talk to more people about, for sure, like racism, and I think sexual orientation. We have like Ella Taylor. There was that one episode, but I like to talk more about, for sure, like homophobia, this kind of stuff. And also, just because I've been doing in my counselling course, we've been doing the protected characteristics this week. I was thinking we haven't done much on like ageism either. But also, I feel that in the music industry, that's usually the other way around, that we see quite a lot of older people in the profession or in the orchestras. So I haven't quite figured out how that is set up in my mind yet. But yeah, it's always, even if we have two people talking about a similar topic, it's never a similar interview. Like, it's always completely different. So yeah, I'm just looking forward to trying to interview all these people that Hattie's sent me.
Well, hopefully they're going to say yes. That's also a big thing you have to consider. Like, doesn't necessarily mean they're going to say yes, and we try and kind of leave it open that it's not, if you don't do this, it doesn't mean it means you don't care or whatever. But you know, sometimes it does take people a few months to reply or to think about it, or that they're not ready. Like, I've messaged a few people who have said, I'd love to talk about it, but it's just not a great time in my life right now. Do you mind if we get back in touch? And I think that's a really great thing to realise, is like, it's not always the right time for someone to share their story. And even though it can be frustrating, because I'm the sort of person that's like, bam, 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 let's share everything right now. It's like, actually, there's a reason. Maybe it needs to take more time. Maybe I can think a bit more. We can think a bit more about exactly how we want to frame the interview and everything. So in terms of what I want, what I personally think would be cool to talk about next, I have this big kind of topic, and a few people have actually asked about it as well, surrounding doing something else in classical music. So the stigma of like, what if I decide I want to be a doctor suddenly, or what if I realise that it's not serving me anymore, I need some time away. I feel like that is something that's so hugely stigmatised. Now, I remember in music school, so often we'd be like, teachers would say, you don't want to be one of those musicians who gets to the age of 25 and does something different, you know? And I always thought that was a bit strange, and I always judged those people. But now I'm kind of like, oh, where are those people? I'd love to talk to them. Like, why did they decide to change? Have they come back a bit? Do they think they're going to come back? What is it about the music profession that really put them off and meant that it wasn't serving them anymore? So definitely there's a kind of whole world of past musicians, or musicians having a bit of a hiatus or something, that I'd love to focus on a bit more as well.
That's really interesting. And actually there's something that you have with your podcast that I'm very jealous of, which is, you know, presumably if you don't have a guest for an episode, but you'd like to record an episode, you have each other to talk to, which is, you know, you can have discussions on the topics that interest you and you want to learn more about anyway, which I'm very jealous about. Because I have to
talk to
harangue
yourself.
people. I used to
talk to myself, like...
Hey, you did that whole mental health week where you just did monologues.
I know, I really advocate for a monologue, Melissa. I think you'd be great at that. You have such like a good voice and like succinct ideas.
I think I've got friends listening to this that receive voice notes from me on the regular that are thinking, please don't do that. Because once I start talking, it veers off in all sorts of strange pathways. I don't know, maybe I should do it as an experiment and see what happens.
Well,
anyway.
The good thing about podcasts is you can edit. Like, there's so much of our podcast that it's just us like rambling, then we're like, nope, cut that.
Yeah, problems for future me, that's fine. So that sort of leads me on to then, you know, what's your favourite thing about things musicians don't talk about?
Nothing. Joking.
Like, it has this like stupid way of putting irrelevant jokes.
That is my favourite thing. Me. I I think
Your inability to take it seriously is your favourite thing.
ha ha ha. Yeah, sometimes I'm like, oh God, I forgot that people don't necessarily joke about this all the time. But I'm also very serious about it. I think the fact that Hattie and I didn't meet for so long, and we did so many episodes together before we'd met, and we just kind of like gelled together, which was really nice. And that actually, yeah, maybe we should do some more planning sometimes, but we don't often do a lot of planning because it just kind of happens. But also, we've got other things going on in life, and it's hard to keep it all in balance sometimes. But yeah, I really like the way that there's never any, between us for sure, there's never any boundary or weirdness about a certain topic. And maybe sometimes that is hard because then you get a guest and you're like, oh, like I have to be a bit more careful with just expecting them to say something. But I really, really appreciate the world that Hattie has created of this. Just as you said, there's so many topics that are covered, and there doesn't seem to be anything that's off limits. And I think occasionally I've been somewhere and somebody's been like, oh, you're from the podcast, and they've known me through that before knowing me, which has been really cool. And then they kind of feel more open about talking about specific things with me. And it's really nice to have that just vibe with people. And that's my favourite.
That's really sweet. But also, like, I feel the same. I think my favourite thing about it as well is, like, Rebecca joining, quite honestly. Like, that was a real step forward because there's only so much in this world of things that I think I could have done on my own, because it's very vulnerable, it's very difficult, and I'd have so many vulnerability hangovers of like sharing and then spending the next few days overthinking. But now Rebecca's there, not
We
as
can
backup.
overthink together.
We can do it, yeah. We can, like, it's just so much more sort of like, I know I've met this person that thinks really similarly in terms of how much we want to share and, how we want it to move forward and things. Like, that is such a relief because it feels like everything can be much more authentic than it maybe was before. But also, my other favourite thing, I think, is hearing if an episode has helped someone. Which is a very kind of easy thing to say and to brag about, but it's a real privilege to like hold space in that way, especially if it's someone who maybe has a similar story to me or is younger than me, because, like, I'm sure, Melissa, you understand this as well, and Rebecca probably, but I spent so many years in music college really unwell mentally. And the reason that I started this was because I thought, if I'd have known about this thing, that doesn't necessarily mean I'd have to share, but it would mean that I knew classical musicians were talking openly about the dark parts of my mind that I feel I have to keep a secret. So when someone shares, thank you so much for talking about that, I've really dealt with it, maybe I'm not ready to talk about it yet, but just the fact that you're here and that you spoke about that really helped me, that is my absolute favourite thing.
Yeah, there's a couple of things you've said there that really resonate with me, both as a podcaster and as someone who's suffered with mental health. And, I hope that, like, my platform, as like silly and not very serious as it is a helpful resource, because I think, if I had a platform like this when I was at college and I could have learned about all the sorts of different jobs that were okay for me to have as a musician, maybe I'd have made different, more informed choices. So a similar thing, if I'd heard stories from musicians with OCD, maybe I wouldn't have like clammed up on it for like 7 years and refused to talk about it. But there's also so many things where people have been like, oh, I listened to your interview and I had no idea about what OCD was really like or what your experience was really like. And if that one time that I've decided to talk about the oddities of my brain helps somebody else accept theirs, not even talk about it, then we've all done something kind of right, haven't we?
And I think actually something that's really stuck with me from our interview, Melissa, was when I was kind of like asking you, do you want to tell them, like, I don't know, I was so kind of flippant about like, oh, do you want to explain like your themes and your intrusive thoughts and you were like, I just don't feel like that's something that's really important in my healing, and I was like, kind of taken aback. I was like, oh my gosh, actually, this isn't just about sharing the absolute in-depth details of our mental health, but actually like the general, someone is here suffering. It doesn't really matter the ins and outs of their suffering. It just matters that they have suffered in a really deep way and that we're here talking about it. That really struck me because I was like, actually, I don't have to know the deep, dark details of everybody's like mental illnesses for it to be impactful. So I really thank you for like making me really aware of that, because from then on, I've just really thought about that. Like, is it really important for me to know if they're, I don't have to force people to share the ins and outs unless they feel ready to.
Yeah, and the
So
thing that when I talked to you, I I couldn't decide where I wanted to not set a boundary, because that sounds like all those things I wasn't going to tell you, Hattie, ha ha ha.
no, it's
But what
fair
I mean is
enough.
like, what was important to talk about and what wasn't. And actually, I realised that if I discussed, really my themes or my compulsions, that actually I know that that's kind of triggering to me. And I hear that word used so often, so flippantly all the time, but, in a genuine sense, it, can trigger a whole nother little round. And so I thought, actually, we all don't really need that, so we'll save that for another time.
Yeah,
It
yeah.
it is such a fine line, and when you talk about mental health so often, you do sometimes start to wonder whether it's making you worse because you're just thinking about it all the time. And there is that thing of, you hope that you're not triggering people who are listening to the podcast, and I think it will just always be that impossible dilemma of sharing, and because you can't be responsible for who's listening. Obviously, you don't want to trigger someone, but everybody's so unique, um, that you've just got to take care of yourself first, and often that ends up being enough anyway. But it's really tricky to know where all the boundaries lie, as you say.
I think that's what's so great about it being a kind of archive, though, because I think there are episodes maybe someone will see and they'll be in the middle of, I don't know, having suicidal thoughts or OCD or something, and they'll be like, right, oh my gosh, like that's freaky. I don't want to listen to that. But then maybe when they've got over it, they'll remember, oh, I remember Things Musicians Don't Talk About had an episode on that. And I feel kind of like maybe I'm in a place where I'd really like to listen to that. So I don't think we necessarily expect people are going to want to listen to deep
Hot
things
off
when
the
they're in the
press.
middle, when they're really in it. Like that, as you say, could be quite triggering and quite unhelpful. But it's the fact that it's there forever now as an archive if people want to go back. Same with the injury, not musicians aren't always injured, but you might become injured and remember, gosh, I could really do with listening to a couple of other experiences right now. And I remember they had that series. So it's a lot about kind of, yeah, not expecting people necessarily to engage right now, but just knowing that it's there for them if they need it.
And going slightly off on a tangent, because in my use of the word triggering, I realised how annoying I find that word because of how often we hear it thrown about. I wonder how you feel about, and maybe how you deal with, when you hear someone misusing a term like the one that I hear all the time, and in certain circumstances I have to bite my tongue on. So when somebody says, oh, I'm really OCD, I cleared out my cupboard last night, and I'm like, so you like things tidy? It's not the same. But I always feel like it happens at a time that it's really awkward, where I don't feel like I'm in a place to be able to call them out and be like,
Yeah,
that's wrong, and
me
my
too.
experiences don't line up with that. I wonder how you feel about like when you hear these terms. And PTSD is another one that gets thrown around, anxiety, depression, the word triggered, all these sorts of things are being used as like colloquialisms, which they're absolutely not. How do you feel about that? And do you ever find yourself in my position where I'm like, oh, I want to say something so bad, but it's not the time and it's not the place?
Constantly, yeah, constantly. I mean, I'm trying to think of an example. Was it yesterday that happened? Yeah, in my driving lesson. the other day, my instructor was going on about, oh, what was she saying? She's saying something really racist anyway. And this is not really to do with mental health. She's saying something really racist, and I was just sat there and just thinking, it's not worth going back at her right now. And I think that's kind of, if someone is so far from your experience, I often find it's just kind of, it's not gonna help if they're, especially if it's someone you don't see very often. If it's someone you see very often, and I have a lot of friends that say, I'm really OCD about my bin, I'm really OCD about my kitchen, I'm really OCD about my bathroom. I don't know what it is, and I'm not saying this is right, but I just it doesn't really bother me. And it's kind of the same with my faith. Maybe I'm completely going off a tangent here, but it's kind of the same with my faith. Like, I'm a practicing Christian. I don't talk about that all that much, but I say, oh my God, blah, 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 all the time. Not in a way of meaning to blaspheme. And if people say around me, oh, Jesus Christ, I don't personally want to say Jesus Christ, Jesus fucking Christ, whatever. But I can just accept it's a kind of colloquialism that's naturally in people's vocabulary. Calling them out on it could be helpful, but could also put me at a disadvantage in my relationship with them. So I don't know. It's a really good question, actually. And I haven't thought much about it. So Rebecca, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, it's really tricky, and I feel like, especially in this age where we can learn about so many things online, we learn about so many experiences, and we feel a deep responsibility to say the right thing all the time and to make sure that others don't say the wrong thing if they're in our presence. And I think, yeah, there's this, especially since the Black Lives Matter riots, like the last couple of years, and like the increase in information about that, I feel like, especially with racism, there's such a culture of, you have to call out things when they're said. And whilst I agree, and you can try, it's not always like that in reality, like you say. And actually, I often find the same thing, that when I'm in that situation, I just clam up. And often it is with somebody that you feel comfortable with, and that they've just said something in passing, and it kind of takes you by surprise because you were just having a normal conversation. And often you only realise a few seconds after they said it, and they've already moved on. And you don't want to be like, hang on a sec, can we just go back to that? Because it feels, as you say, incredibly awkward. I think for me, I feel more able to do it when it's something that maybe doesn't directly affect me. So if there was something about depression or eating disorders or being bisexual or something like that that was to do with my identity, I think I'd feel really like challenged, or I'd find it really hard to call that out, because it felt like a direct impact on me, and I would feel quite vulnerable. But I feel some sort of, when I do feel able to do it, it's usually when it's something that I'm like, that doesn't affect me, and I feel a certain type of strength because I feel like it hasn't impacted me here, it's just impacted me here. And so that sometimes I call it out, but again, it is that thing of, you're always not wanting to make the other person feel awful, because it usually is somebody that you're just, well, I don't know, the couple of times I've had it recently, it's been with people that I know and like, and you don't want it, as you say, to affect your relationship, but it is so tricky because obviously
it's change to happen as well.
Yeah, you want change to happen.
Yeah,
it's impossible.
I wonder if it's like this sort of just forever call for like self-reflection. It's like, when I was teaching, I realized that I used the term "you guys" all the time as a collective, which isn't fair or inclusive or, particularly, progressionist way of thinking. And I've spent the last year, every time I have a collective group of people, trying to make sure I say folks. And maybe it means that I'm overusing this word, but it means now that my default is not to use the sort of exclusionary language. So I wonder if it's a sort of similar thing, as people just sort of, it's not going to happen overnight, but maybe if you notice you say it once, okay, little sort of put a pin in that. If you say it again, see if there's something else you could say instead. It's just, catching it when it happens, because it
I'm-
can't happen immediately, but it's just
I
being
read
aware.
I read a really good article the other day, actually, which was on classicalmusic.co.uk. I can't remember what it's actually called, the website, but it was about people who review music using language of mental illness to describe music, and why that's so out of date and why it needs to stop. And it was because so often you read things that describe things as schizophrenic and bipolar and manic, and it does, if you read that about yourself, if you read that about a piece of music and you have that experience yourself, you might either feel that it's not part of your experience or that it's just completely reducing it to, and there are so many other words to use. I feel like we've definitely in classical music really overused these kind of stigmatizing mental illness words as a kind of way of, even conductors might say, oh, this needs to be really quite schizophrenic here. I've definitely heard that before. I'm sure you
And
might
we're
have
never
done.
using it to be positive, though, are we? We're not
No,
using
yeah, exactly.
that in a nice way. We never hear it
Good
used
point. Yeah,
in a positive way.
exactly. And I mean, people's experience of schizophrenia is not all bad. They have very fulfilling lives most of the time. And I think that's a really good point. It's always negative. It's always like, I want this to be erratic and out of control and negative, and it just puts that on those people again and again. So it's a really good point. Yeah.
But it also means that people in that environment that are hearing those words again and again, who don't experience that thing, then just assume. I mean, music is such it's something that really stays with you. And, if they hear the word schizophrenic, they might think of that piece of music. If somebody's come to them and be like, oh, I suffer from this, like they automatically associate it with this crazy negative thing that they're also probably trying to exaggerate in rehearsal or whatever. It's just not helpful
Yeah,
for
it's
anyone.
like the way that films portray mental illness as well. It kind of all ties into the same music image that we have of people as dangerous, scary, atonal, not
Unpredictable.
nice sound, unpredictable. Yeah, such a good point.
Oh my
Wow.
God, it's such a web, isn't it? Like, where do you start unraveling this? It's like, it's what my headphones used to look like when they had wires. Anyway, that was a really odd reference. Right, well, I was going to say, it's 2 hours in and already I'm losing the ability to find good adjectives, which is promising. If you're still here at 7 p.m, just make sure I'm all right. Anyway, it sort of links me a little bit on to one of the other questions that I wanted to include, which is, what do you hope to see in the way of change in the music industry within perhaps the next 5 or 10 years then? Because, we've just said all the things we're not happy with. Can we change that? And is there anything else that you would like to... I'm using the word change rather than improve, so I'm sticking with it. Change.
Hattie?
I honestly think you should go first.
Oh yeah, of course you do. I guess, yeah, it's hard to think. Every time I think of a concrete thing, I always think of how improbable that is going to happen because of the societal and mental image that we have around the thing that's stopping it. So I think it really is just more. I was talking to my boyfriend this morning about what it would look like if more people talked about mental health in the music industry. And I guess, yeah, it would be great if higher profile people could talk about their experiences. And I realise that's kind of a double-edged sword because, yeah, I feel like a lot of change comes from the top down in the music industry, like a lot of industries. And as much as we're putting the work in at the bottom, you often do just need that person at the top to just kind of say something, and it gives you a pull up and the work kind of shifts up one level. But also there is a danger that you then just, because there's always this us and them feeling anyway. And I think that when people higher up potentially share their experiences with mental health or whatever, then you still get an us and them, and you can very easily explain away like, oh, well, they suffer from anxiety because they play to billions of people and they have such like a jet-setting life. Like, of course they feel like that, but my problems, I'm just preparing for my music college chamber exam or something, so how are they comparable? So I think it's gonna be tricky whatever happens, but I think there will always be an us and them, so you may as well have a different us and them that's more mental health, openness based anyway. But I think the one change, like a tangible change I would like to see, because I think our formative years as professional musicians are your music college years. Like, yes, you have all the years before where you're learning, but music college is where everything comes into a melting pot. It suddenly becomes a place where you put numbers on performances and you get this real sense of competitiveness in those 5 or 6 years or whatever. So I'd really like to see an emphasis more on, it sounds so cliche, but health and well-being. I'd like to see counselling normalised in music colleges. It would be my dream that everybody could have like a mandatory counselling session after every exam, you know, just to have like a debrief. But also from our injury week, normalising going to see the physio preventatively and just knowing that your music college has one. And these are all very like, these things take money, resources, but those things aside, I think music college is where so many people's problems in later life kind of stem from. So I think that's where we need to focus on.
I'm going to jump in quickly because your musician's injury week was awesome, and it's something that I think is dodged around, like you say, at music college. I had an embouchure injury in my final year. I didn't know what to do. I'd been there 4 years, and I was like, who do I ask for help, and what can I do about it? And it's an easy injury for me to have suffered as a brass player, and it was a stupid injury, really. I just played too much. It was easily preventable.
There's no stupid injury.
Well, yeah, I mean, possibly talking about sort of balance and boundaries and things like that. Anyway, that is all included. But why, in my 4th year of being in an establishment, did I not know who to ask for help and how to ask for help? It's so crazy. So yes, I'm very much backing up the point. Yeah.
It's so basic. And like, if you think about, and I'm not saying that the ballet industry in any way is less of a pot of just crap, because they go through shit, and I'm not saying it's easy, but I do think in terms of injury, they have more support. Mentally, it's the same absolute crap. They obviously have so much pressure physically and everything. But I do think, the Opera House has a physio suite. They have, a gym. They have all this support for that. And we are physical players. We play with our bodies. We don't play, I don't know what we play. We play with our bodies. I don't really understand how else to put it. Like, we should have physical support. Injury is, and it doesn't really matter, I think, whether it's psychosomatic or whatever, you need to know there's someone to go to explain your problem to, and to make sure that you're taken seriously. And I think that is definitely an absolutely huge point of change we would love to see. I think for me, I really, really know what Rebecca says about the us and them thing, and actually this is another thing, late night communication we had. I found a really recent study about mental illness in classical musicians. It was done by the University of Amsterdam, and they found that up to 60% of music students suffer with anxiety or depression, compared to 38% of professionals. So I think there's a very clear, as you say, us and them between professionals, established professionals with secure situations, which is also privileged, but there we go, and music college. And I was thinking, wow, that's my experience too, because if I took that test now in a more professional setting, I would definitely score lower than I did in music college. Music college is a place for so much insecurity, so much anxiety, so much stress. And I was so keen when I was at music college to put it all on my brain, to put it all on as my fault. It's my fault I'm depressed. It's my fault I've got OCD. This is all completely separate to my college, nothing to do with it. But now I've left and things seem more manageable and I have more support. It's like, fuck, yeah, definitely it was not a healthy place to be for my mental health. And they should not be like that. Music college can be an incredible place. So there just needs to be a culture of sharing, a culture of I don't know. I just really want to get rid of this like competitive hours per day kind of tortured artist thing. Like it was so kind of glamorous if you were in until 11 practicing, like practicing like 3 hours in the evening, and kind of like I remember going to college at like 8 and feeling so kind of het up about how kind of cool I was, that I was killing myself. I was so tired, so worn out. I've had a huge day, but I love music this much that I'm going to go and do 3 hours of practice. I don't know, it's such a weird culture that we've created in music college of that. I would love that to change.
And then it's like you have all that when you're around people and you're around systems that could support you, and then you graduate and you go into a world where you feel so alone, and you don't just forget everything you've had in music college, you take it with you, and you're always told that, when you're in the real world, it's going to be so much harder and you're going to be on your own, and that sets you up for a state of fear and trying to cram it all in music college, and then you're suddenly left, you feel just so like, but now I don't see everyone every day, and now do I have to keep doing that? What is my life now? And there's no transition period, and yeah, I just think we need to get it better.
I still get guilt every day when I've like been teaching all day and I haven't practiced. I still get guilt about not having practiced, but I've been out and I'm working and I'm doing music things all day, doing my job, but I'm still like, oh, I've done less than 30 minutes of practice today. Well, the world's not going to stop turning. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And it's so interesting, isn't it? Because here we sit, 3 music college graduates with the same feelings and the same experiences. So it's not a fluke, is it? It's not a one-off. And I don't know, it's frightening, isn't it? And I sometimes get asked, are you training your students to go off to become musicians? And I'm like, probably not. No, I would like them to be fulfilled musicians in themselves. If for them that means they want to go and train further, then great. But no, it's hard. It's real hard. And I don't know that I would actively encourage someone to pursue the same path. I'm very happy with my job. I like what I do. I like the opportunities it's given me, but it's really tough to get to this point. And I don't know, I'm not sure I'd want to be encouraging someone to walk the same path and have the same difficulties. But maybe there are people out there who've had completely different experiences of college. Please tell me if you have, because I'd love to hear your idyllic stories. Like, genuinely, that sounds very sarcastic, but I'm so fascinated because that's not what I lived, unfortunately.
Yeah, no, I'm so with you. That's so funny.
It's so hard.
Oh, I can't remember what I was going to say. Oh yeah, I was going to say, in terms of change as well, I'd love to see broadcasting of classical music change. Not to include... Oh, I don't want to get too...
This is one of your pet peeves, literally. Along with the WhatsApp chat, she'll be like, oh God, this radio station is at it again.
It's just so annoying to me how different Radio 3 is to Radio 1, okay? And I know it's a snobbery thing. And it's not that I want them to be identical. No, of course not. Have the culture, have the interesting, informed chats. Fine, it's not a problem. But even on Radio 4, they talk about mental illness, they talk about important elements to musicians' lives. But on this, what's it called? That thing every day that goes on Radio 3. What's it called?
I don't think we listen as intently as you do.
I can't remember. I can't remember what it's called. But every day they interview a musician and have a little performance. Mm-hmm. And the questions are always focused on the music. Always focused on the music. Are focused on their career and the music and their career and the music. And it's so boring. It's like, where's the personality in that as well? I'm not just saying you have to share. If you're not depressed, then I don't want to know. It's more like, can we get a bit more of like the real person behind the musician and behind the music and everything? Like, it just feels very black and white. Like, let's please the audience by just sharing very kind of minimal like successful details of a musician's life. I don't know.
It doesn't also have to be all that highbrow. Sometimes I just want to know, like, what Shaku Kenna Mason's having for tea.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, do you like pasta? I love pasta. I'd like to know. I can relate to you then.
Yeah, like a bit of humour there. Like, yeah, exactly. It is just very dry, and it doesn't feel like a supportive space in the way that I feel it could. I think it has so much potential to lead this new change in the way that classical musicians are viewed, and that goes on into, you know, what Ellie Costa's doing with her ensemble. It goes across the board. I'm not just talking about mental illness, you know, but I think that they could be leading in a much more creative way instead of staying the same and constantly having the same conversations with the same narrative. That's basically what I'm trying to say. And okay, if I criticise them, maybe that's not going to do me well, but they need to hear it.
We haven't been invited on yet, so...
Well, exactly. Maybe we're going to start our own radio station.
Oh my god.
Maybe.
Admin.
You'd have to talk a lot.
Yeah, I don't think we could do that, Hattie. Sorry.
So before we go, I have on my laptop my "What Would You Wear" sticker, and I wanted to tell you.
So do I.
But one of my kids asked me the other day. They were like, "Miss Brown, what does that mean?" And I managed to sort of have this conversation on a very sort of simple level with this 7-year-old girl as to, you know, who Yuja is and what we need to talk about and why we need to focus on, you know, what she plays and not what she wears. And I wanted to tell you this little story because I thought it was awesome that she saw my sticker.
Good.
I mean, the holographic element definitely caught her eye like a magpie, but it meant that she could ask me what she said. Yeah, you know, when she saw it, like, what does this mean? And so we could sort of talk about it. And yeah, nice little opportunity to discuss that. Have you heard any more since you know, sort of going to town about it?
Oh, have you heard any more? Not really. It's interesting.
Funnily enough, it's just kind of died down again.
It has died down. We definitely are keeping up with the blog.
For sure.
Making sure that nothing goes under the radar.
Yeah, we screenshot a lot and send it to each other. But no, talking about like the stickers, like as much as I've had a couple of conversations with my students as well, and like it is that thing of that's why the whole thing, even on like an adult level, is so ridiculous, because when you boil it down to the bare facts, even a child is like, that's wrong. That's shit. Like, and that's what annoys me when it gets dressed up in all these arguments by adults who are like, yeah, but blah, blah, blah. And it's like, just take a step back from this being in the classical music world. If this were any other industry, this would be immediately cut. And I think that it just highlights, there were so many things that it highlighted, but that was just another thing of like, because this is the classical music world and because we're allowed to be snobs and just talk about the music and how this person is like their identity as a person and what they want to wear and who they are should be sacrificed in order for the music to speak. And there's just so few industries where that is the same situation. So yeah, good on your student. Hopefully they can take down the patriarchy.
I hope so too. And it's so frustratingly irrelevant as well. You know, it's not like you just wearing a short skirt to distract us from her terrible playing. She's choosing to wear what she wants to play the piano like a superhero, right? Like, it's just so wildly irrelevant. Well done. I was too cross to do anything with it. I was just like, no. Just
all Rebecca.
Put it in the bin.
This campaign has been Rebecca's baby.
Yeah, but inspired by your anger.
My anger?
What teamwork?
My anger's always there for you if you need it.
Yeah, exactly. I take it on.
But honestly, she, like, what you wrote, your annotations, everything, like, oh, it was so needed, and it was just so factual. It was just, yes, honestly.
We love facts.
We love facts. And as you say, like, again, it's not to say that pop musicians don't get abuse for what they wear. They do, fine. But it's never kind of in the same context of, like, does this mean that our whole industry is being reduced to, the pop industry? Like,
oh no.
Heaven forbid.
Yeah,
amazing.
That's where we stand.
Well, I mean, it's a great place to stand. We need people to stand up for things and to speak about things, and we're very grateful that you're, fighting the good fight, sort of on behalf of everybody else as well. Yeah. Everyone needs stickers, and these are so brilliantly shiny. Sorry, I can't look at it for too long because I don't know if you've noticed, both times I've looked at it, I've forgotten how to speak because I'm just so captivated by this shiny, which I think is sort of sums up the state of my brain at any given point. But folks, I've just seen the time, and I said this in the last panel as well. I have to be so careful today because if I'm not careful, I will just go for 2 hours and forget the next panel completely. So I'm going to wrap it up there, and I'm going to say a huge thank you. Folks, if you haven't gone and seen what Hattie and Rebecca are doing over at Things Musicians Don't Talk About, please go forth and do so, because they are doing some wonderful things, having some wonderful conversations, and as you've heard, bringing some change from the bottom upwards. That's what we're going to do. So we'll wrap it up there, and we will keep in touch, and I'll be back in just a few minutes for yet another panel.
Well, thank you.
Have
Thanks,
a wonderful
Melissa.
rest of the day,
You are
folks.
a brilliant interviewer, and we just wish you
Love
all the best.
you.
We really do. I'm so just impressed with all your questions. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
I'm going to take some notes because they're really cool.
I'm always here for bouncing ideas around. Always is. Fab. Folks, I'm going to have to end the meeting to be able to start this all again. It's all chaos, but you're amazing. Have a lovely weekend. Thank you so much.
Have fun.
Bye.
Bye.